Hi, everyone, and welcome to OLA 2020. Thank you so much for joining us for Imagine One App to Rule Them All. I am Allison Hayes, and I am the incoming chair for the Public Library Division. I am so excited to moderate this session for you, and today I am joined by Christine Peterson with Amigos, and she's going to tell us all about SimplyE. So without further ado, I will turn it over to her.
Thank you, Allison. So as she said, this presentation is going to be about an app that we have been developing. It's an open source app, and we have our first Oklahoma library that came on in the last month. So I'm very, very excited to do this particular presentation at this time. So when we talk about one app to rule them all, obviously, if you have read Lord of the Rings, that's almost a direct quote from that. The idea of being able to help our patrons so that there is a single app that they can get quote everything. Now we all know everything is almost going to be impossible, but at least the most popular types of formats, so they don't have to switch apps, so they don't have to learn different interfaces. That's where this app comes in. SimplyE is an app that will allow patrons to be able to search and read and listen across vendors or across aggregators. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk a little bit about the open source piece of it and why at Amigos Library Services we really think that that piece is very important to libraries, both academic and public. So I assume if you have read the summary, I'm not going to belabor the point, but the idea here is this app does provide a single, easy to use interface for your patrons. When somebody asks me about SimplyE, this is my definition right here. It's an open source ebook and audiobook platform. It's developed by libraries, for libraries, obviously for patrons. The whole point is to simplify your patrons' user experience. So those of you who have worked in public libraries, and I say Adobe, then Adobe ID, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You understand the frustration. You also understand the frustration of having to deal with multiple aggregators. That's what we're trying to help here. The idea of that experience, finding titles, borrowing them, and reading or listening to them, both ebooks and audiobooks, that's the focus of this particular app. So it replaces this, all of the apps, all of the websites, and it replaces it hopefully with one. Now I will stop here and just say that we are not there yet. This is a project that is in development, and I will talk to you very candidly as we go through here about what works, what is coming very soon, and then where it's headed. So for some libraries, we have, the last count, we have about 200 libraries across the nation that are using SimplyE in some form right now. We have a little bit, we have some very important functionality that's coming out late summer, which everybody here will be excited about, and I'll talk about that as I talk about the open source development. So by fall, this should be an app that every public library should seriously look at. So what I'm going to do first is give you an overview of what this looks like. Now, I think I'm going to have to move myself down just a little bit so I can see the screen. When you come into the app, what you're going to see are lanes. And so these are default lanes that come with the app. So we have fiction, nonfiction, young adult fiction, and nonfiction. And at the bottom, there's one for children's. You can change these, you can modify them, you can modify the subheadings underneath these. You can not show a fiction category, but instead go right to romance, westerns, paranormal, whatever you like. This is all modifiable by you. I do want to mention that up at the top here, we do have an immediate filter. There is a third option, which is all. So if you want the default to be your patrons to see all of the ebooks and audiobooks, then that would be the default, but your patrons can change it to just see one format or the other. So let's start looking at. In the upper right corner, there's that magnifying glass, which of course you've seen many times before in other pieces of software, which means we're going to search. So the first thing we're going to do is do basic searching in the app. I've done Game of Thrones, and you can see a listing of titles and what it looks like to your patrons. And notice there's just very basic bibliographic information here. And then underneath it, you'll see a button. And many of these buttons say get. So you can download the title right from here. You don't have to go any further. Or you might see one that says read. And if it says read, that means I've already checked it out. And if you can look really closely at read, it'll tell you how many days you have left in your checkout period. And then there's reserve, and we'll look at those a little bit more. But what I want to focus on right here is just the interface. So if we look at Game of Thrones, we can see the author, the title. There's usually not much more here. If you click on either the cover art or the title, you'll go to more specific information about it. Obviously, you can download it from here, but if we click on that, we'll get to see a little bit more information. So we will see under this green bar or this teal bar, a little bit of the summary description, if there's a table of contents. This section is not for librarians. This section is for public library patrons. So you're not going to see all of the details that you're going to see in a MARC record or in an ILS. Down below that, you'll see a section that says information. And what I want to do is draw your attention to the very last piece in that information section that says distributed by. This is the only place that will tell you that this title is coming from Biblioteca or Overdrive or Odillo or Biblioboard or wherever. It is there. You might notice that so far everything we have seen just has the library's information on it. This is the only place you'll see the distributor or the publisher. If you scroll down a little bit further, underneath the information section, if you have EBSCO's Novelist, which will provide recommendations, it can provide other titles within this collection, within a series, or by that author, you'll see those lanes as well. At the very bottom, you'll see something that says report a problem. This is where your patrons can report a problem. And this email will go to the library. There's a couple things as I go through this presentation that I'm going to point out. And one of them has to do with demoting the distributor's name, like Biblioteca, so it is not obvious. And also making sure that that connection between the patron and the library stays. And Amigos, we are a hosting provider for this, as other nonprofits are, but we are not going to get in the middle of that relationship. That relationship needs to stay between the patron and the library. So the initial email will always go to the library. The library can always come to us, and we can help you if it's something you can't work with. So this is the interface. This is what you're looking for. Once you've checked it out, you'll see these two buttons. Do you want to read it, or do you want to return it? If we click on read, this is an example of some of the options within. Now, again, if you have already used other ebook readers, some of this is going to be very familiar to you. In the upper right corner, you'll see three icons. The first one will give you a table of contents to jump around. The third one will bookmark the page, and I'm just going to leave those for later. But the middle one is the accessibility piece. So changing the fonts, changing the background foreground colors, changing the size of the font, and changing the brightness of the page. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at the Open Dyslexic font. And if you've never heard of that before, it's a font specifically for people who have dyslexia. And you might notice that the bottom of the letters are heavier, and that helps them keep grounded, so they can keep the bottoms of the letters in the right place. This is an open source. I shouldn't say open source. It's an open font, which means anybody can use this. We are moving by the end of summer to the next version of this reader, which is going to include additional accessibility options. So what we have here are the basic ones. By the end of August, we expect to see even more in here. If you see an audiobook, if you're checking out an audiobook, this is the interface you'll see for that. And the one thing we hope is that this is so simple that the first thing they will see is this great big arrow down in the middle on the bottom, which obviously means play. If that is the one thing we want them to see. Obviously 15 seconds behind, moving backwards, 15 seconds moving forward. At the bottom, you can increase or decrease the speed. You can change the connection. Are you going to connect it to your iPad? Are you going to connect it to your headset? There's a sleep timer. Up at the top, you can see where you are in the book. this book is 8 hours and 35 minutes long. You're in part 1, in this case it's a chapter, but it's part 1 of 19, and then this part you're 7 seconds into a 27-second part or chapter. So it's all here, and the idea is that we're trying to keep it as simple as possible, so when somebody comes in they don't have to learn it again. It's all just there and they can just see how to work through it. All right, out of that, let's go back to the app for a second. I mentioned that you can put a title on hold. Now I know that they use the term reserve here. One of the options in one of the upcoming releases is going to be changing that to putting it on hold, because when you start dealing with academic libraries, that term reserve actually means something very specific. So you'll have that option. But right now, just think of that this says hold, and if it already is checked out, you can put yourself on a list, and when you check it out, it will tell you you are number 6 of however many, and it will give you an idea of how long you have to wait. This can be good or bad. If it's a very long list, it may say you're going to have to wait 300 days, unless somebody checks it out and returns it early. So I guess what I would say here is it helps set expectations for patrons. So for searching, the one thing I do want to say that right now in the app, searching is keyword only. There is no idea right now of an author search or a title search. It is keyword. There is additional work being done to bring academic functionality into this app, and I do expect to see those things in the app when the academic functionality comes in. But if you do it right now, it is a keyword only search. If you decide to move it down into subjects or categories, obviously I've clicked into the first category here of nonfiction. If you look all the way over to the right, you'll see the word more. Every one of these lanes has the word more. So you can either click on, for example, art and design, which I'm going to in a second, or you can click on the word more, and that will take you to the next set of titles. So you can just dig or drill into this. If we click on art, we'll go in one more time until we finally get to a list of titles. And again, this list should look very familiar. You see the buttons for get, you might see download here, you might see reserve. What I want to focus here is on sorting. So you do have the ability to sort by author title and a random sort. And you do have the ability, to sort by availability, or I should say filter by availability. So do you want to see everything? Do you want to see things that are not checked out, in other words, that are available to you? Or do you want to see titles that are yours to keep? Those are titles that have no digital rights management on them. And when you download them, there's no checkout period. They stay on your device. And so you would think things like Gutenberg titles. A lot of people think of those titles first, and certainly those would be in there, in that list. Now, at the bottom, you will see some more icons. So we have been in the catalog, which is in the bottom left corner. We've been in and out of that catalog. There's also a section for My Books. These are the titles that you have out right now. And you can see that it says read or it says listen. And again, if you look very closely, it'll tell you how many days you have left. So reading and listening. The next icon is for anything that you have on hold or you have a reservation for. You can remove the reservation from in here. So you actually have to come to this section to remove it. And then the last one is what I would consider your preferences area. This is where you're going to put in the information you need to be authenticated. When I talk to a library about how to roll this out at their library, if the library is open, which is questionable right now, but if you are open and you have a patron in front of you, my suggestion is you have them open it up and you have them choose your library from the list, and you go to the settings area first and you have them put in their barcode number and their PIN. And you're standing right there to make sure that it works. Because once it's in, then they're good to go for everything. If you can't do that, obviously, then you might be getting some calls if they mistyped a barcode number, or if they inadvertently went into the wrong library and tried to put their credentials in the wrong library. You may get some questions on that. Once they are signed in once, they have access to everything that you have provided them, and as additional titles come into your collection, they have access to those just transparently. So that's the inside of the app. There's one more thing I do want to draw your attention to, and that is that when they first come in, they're going to choose a library from a list. This is going to change over time to provide some more geographic searching, but for right now, it truly is a list. So if your library begins with W, you are going to be scrolling down the list to the W's. Don't worry, help is on the way. But in this list, you can see that I have access to all of these libraries. So if you're in a position where you have access to a couple of different libraries that use SimplyE, you can certainly get barcodes and pins for all of them and just switch back and forth. And this will become especially important when the academic libraries come on and patrons have access to their academic library as well as the public library in the city where they're going to college, as well as their home public library. So I just wanted to show you that. There is a collection that comes with SimplyE. So everything I've shown you up until now requires the library, obviously, we have to connect to the library subscriptions. So the library, we have to work with the library to get it to work. However, if you go to the Google Play Store or the Apple Play Store, at the Apple App Store, and you search on SimplyE, you can download the app right now. And there will be a collection there for you called the SimplyE collection. And these are all open access titles or freely available titles, one or the other. So there's no DRM here, but it does give you an idea of how the app works. So you can see the sorts up at the top. You can see the buttons that we have seen before. So I just want to draw your attention to that in case you're interested in going to just try it out before your library uses it. So there's the download button. If you see the download button, that's your clue that this is a title that you will be keeping. There's no checkout period on this. It is an open, freely available title. All right, so if we were live, I would ask you if you had any questions about the app, but let's move on for right now. Just an overview of what it does. If you've ever heard that phrase, discovery service, it truly is a discovery service for e-resources. Now, right now, those e-resources are eBooks and audiobooks. We are looking at other formats, but we want to solidify and make sure we have all of the eBooks and audiobooks first. So it does support EPUB, it supports PDF, open PDFs, not DRM PDF, that is in development, but PDFs and audiobook formats. You can also use it on an Apple device or on an Android device. It does connect to a library's current resources. I do get this question every once in a while, so let me just be clear. We are not providing you any subscriptions or any ebooks except for that SimplyE collection that comes with it. If you, you can use SimplyE with just that collection, it's not a problem. But if you want, this actually works best if a library has resources and they want to bring them all together under a single interface. That's what this really works for. Statistics stay with the vendor. So if you are using Overdrive, your statistics will still be there. Just because you're coming through SimplyE makes no difference to Overdrive. It still is a book that's been checked out, and those statistics will be there. Having said that, one thing that the vendors do not provide you is how much the SimplyE app is being used. In other words, how many titles are actually coming through the app as opposed to coming through the Libby app or the vendor's website. And those are statistics we can provide you. We haven't really talked about accessibility, but I do want to say that from the very beginning, this app was originally developed by the New York Public Library. It was an IMLS grant. And accessibility, being a library, was high on their list, accessibility and privacy. Since then, other groups have come in to help with development, and I'll talk to you about who they are, but they're all library groups. So the idea of having an app that's highly accessible, a reader that's highly accessible, as well as guarding the patron's privacy, those are things that are built into the app. They are not afterthoughts. If I could have you watch some of the conversations from the developers who are not librarians, about bringing accessibility in at the beginning of a development of a piece of functionality, I think you would be very, very happy. The swim lanes or the lanes are all customizable. And of course, the branding on there is library branding. It is not the vendor's branding. It's not Amigos' branding. So this kind of goes back to the open source piece of this. Okay, one more question that I know I'm going to get, and that is that no, sorry, we cannot. I wish we could. We cannot support Kindles. This is a decision that Amazon has made. There's one vendor and one vendor only, and other vendors have tried. We have tried. Amazon is sitting tight with Overdrive. So if you have patrons that are wedded to their Paperwhite, this app is not going to touch them, and I would not even try. This app is going to be for everybody else. Those people who may come to you with an app from RB Digital, but you know there are other titles in another vendor, and you think, well, I could teach them 2 apps, or I could just move them into SimplyE where they'd have RB Digital and they'd have Biblioteca, whatever it is that you have. So it's for those people, and it would allow you, those patrons, to be able to see more of your collection instead of, as I said, app hopping, which is a phrase that I use every once in a while. So these are the vendors that are currently that are integrated with the app. Some of the big ones. So we have Overdrive here, we have Access 360, Baker and Taylor, Biblioboard, we have Cloud Library from Biblioteca, we have RB Digital over here on the side. We had Odillo. They updated the way they connect with people, so we are updating that. So right today, we do not have Odillo. We expect to get that fixed again. So that is grayed out a little bit. I also want to draw your attention to Overdrive and that it is grayed out. And the reason it is because we have Overdrive's eBooks right now. We have audiobooks from all of the rest of them, but the audiobooks from Overdrive, they had to wait. It took a long time for Overdrive to say yes to us, and they are in the development stages. And so again, by the end of summer, we should have Overdrive's audiobooks, and then I can take the gray off of that particular logo. Other things that you'll see in there, the DPLA exchange is in there. The DPLA is the Digital Public Library of America, a nonprofit that works primarily with libraries and cultural heritage institutions, but they have an ebook marketplace. And so you can go there to purchase titles if you wish. There's Novelist and that integration I talked to you about. There's Google Analytics. You can get additional statistics from Analytics. Plimpton, short stories and poetry. Project Gutenberg, Unglueit, some more open titles. So those are that's the content that's in there right now that you would pick and choose the pieces that you have access to. In a minute, I will talk to you about the vendors that we're looking at and that we are negotiating with at this point. We have to authenticate your patrons. And on the public library side, we do that through your automation system or your ILS. And right now you're looking at a list of those vendors that are currently integrated. If you don't see yours on the list, that doesn't mean we can't integrate them. This is an open source project, and as libraries come to us with new ILSs, that's when we can integrate them. We cannot integrate until we have the ILS and the library. So we have a good number of them, but I still know that there are others outstanding. On the academic side, that academics will be able to use their ILSs if they want, but most academics are going to something called single sign-on, which means that across the university or across the college, the patron has a single sign-on that works for the bursar's office, all the way through the library, all the way through the cafeteria. And that is being developed right now. So if you're an academic library listening to this, the authentication piece of that is the first piece on the academic side to be done, and it is almost done at this point. So an overview, a really high overview of how this works. We have the patron with their device, and right now they're looking at Game of Thrones inside the SimplyE app. Over here on the left-hand side, we have the servers at Amigos, and we have the metadata for your ebook collections. We also have the cover art, and we also authenticate your patrons. So those are the three things we do. At the bottom, this is your ILS. This is your library. This is where the authentication actually happens. And then over here in the bottom right, this is your provider, Overdrive, Baker and Taylor's Access 360, whoever it is. So how does it work? The patron is searching through the SimplyE app, and they are looking through the metadata and cover art that we're providing. So they're actually searching through our information on our servers. They click on a title like Game of Thrones, and as soon as they click on that title, we connect with your ILS to see if that patron is okay. Do they have too many finds? Do they have too many titles out? You are the one that tells us that. If the answer is yes, they are fine, then the ILS comes back to us and says, yep, they're good to go. We relay that information back to the app, and then that app goes directly to your provider and says, I have a patron that is authenticated. This is how they were authenticated. This is the title they need. And then the ebook provider will provide that title back to SimplyE. So you'll notice that the ebooks never leave the provider's websites. We have the metadata, we have the cover art, but the titles, the actual files, they stay with the vendor itself, which is why your statistics stay there. This is why. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the inside. One of the things I said I would talk about is the open source piece of this and why we think it's important. This is not a commercial project. This is a project that runs due to the grace of nonprofits, library nonprofits, and the generosity of grants at this point. So when we talk about open source, I know everybody have heard it, and you might know this definition, but just to be sure, anything that is developed, which means that somebody sits down and they're programming something, anything that is developed is free to use, free to distribute for any reason. So if a commercial vendor wanted to use the code that we have developed for SimplyE for themselves, they can do that. They can take the code and they can modify it, and they can do that. This is totally open. There's no issue with commercial versus non-commercial. The three major pieces of an open source project are collaboration, meaning that we can accept changes from anybody. Now, there's usually a gatekeeper, a gatekeeper, which is an organization that will make sure that those changes make sense, but anybody can make changes and submit them. Adoption, remixing, they can use these changes can be used for almost anything. Somebody could come and use a piece of SimplyE, just a part of it, and use it for something else just in their library, or use it as a part of a larger project. Remixing it, adopting it to whatever a library needs, and then transparency. Anybody can inspect. So let's talk about these three things with SimplyE. Collaboration is huge. The New York Public Library on the far left was the one that started this. They were the ones that got the grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Not long after that, Minitex and Amigos came in. We are two nonprofit library consortia. Minitex is based in Minnesota, Amigos is based in the Southwest, and we started working, helping to develop the project. Amigos has been working on this project for 2.5 years. We just made it an Amigos service last fall. So we have been working on it for a while. About a year and a half ago, DPLA and Lyrasis came in also as part of this collaboration, providing programming resources, providing money, providing direction. So there are other organizations, but I would say these are probably the 5 biggest ones at this point. I mentioned a minute ago about the gatekeeper. Anybody can create code, but there's a gatekeeper. Right now, that's New York Public Library. That could change in the future, but right now it is New York. Adoption and remixing. Everybody I just talked about has big pieces of this project that they work on. The Digital Public Library created this wonderful marketplace called the DPLA Exchange so that libraries don't have to go to a commercial vendor. They can go to a nonprofit vendor that is focused on libraries and cultural heritage institutions to purchase their titles. Lyricists, they're the ones that are really on the edge of the academic functionality, and they're the ones that are just finishing up the single sign-on for the academic side. Minitex was the one that brought through the PDF functionality so that if a library has a PDF they want to put up or multiple PDFs, it doesn't have to be in an EPUB format. It can be in a PDF format. Amigos, we were the ones that created a web-based version of SimplyE, which will be out soon. So you don't have to be on a device. You can be on a laptop and you can see your titles. And working together, Amigos and Lyrasis, we are working on moving away from Adobe. There is a freely available digital rights management scheme called LCP. You don't have to write that down, but it is an open version and it gets us away from Adobe, which is so frustrating. And both Amigos and Lyrasis are working on this together. So this, I could go on, but these are the big things that are happening right now, and everybody contributes. And I should say that there are smaller groups that contribute as well. I'm just talking here about the larger ones. And then we get to transparency. Do you want to know what's going on? Each of these next slides have a link that will tell you. Here is the code. It's at GitHub. If you click on this, on the PDF that I'll provide you, you'll go directly to the code. Do you want to know what is wrong or what's being worked on or what the next development pieces are going to be? This is in Jira. Click on this and you can see it's an open version of all of the tickets, of all of the wonderful development that's going to be happening. There's an open forum for anybody who wants to request a new feature. There's a forum for anybody who wants to request a bug be fixed. There's also documentation, and that documentation is very technical. So if you're one that wants to do this yourself for your library, there's documentation for you to do it yourself, or there's documentation for librarians if you want, and there'll be more soon, but documentation of how to implement this in your library. So this documentation is sourced from the community. So definitely when we talk about transparency, this whole project is very transparent. It's wonderful. So what we're looking at here is the beginnings of an open source project. Now it's been open source for a long time, but we're just now getting our legs under us. So having left that, let's talk about where it is and where it's going. So currently, can you do this now? Sure. You might not be ready now, but sure, if you wanted to. Amigos, we host between 80 and 90 libraries right now. So if you want, you can come to us. Do you want to do it yourself? Are you a DIYer? You want to do this yourself? We will help you. We will tell you where the code is. We will help you along the way. I will tell you that the code requires Amazon Web Services. So if you're not familiar with that, which most library techs are not, either you might want to find a hosting provider, or this is a great time to learn it. AWS is not going away. I put down here an eRead Texas deployment. There are states that are deploying statewide. Texas is one of those. That's one that we are working on. And Texas is working with the smallest of the public libraries. Whereas if you look at, for example, Georgia is coming up right now. They are looking at the larger public libraries first. Maryland, Connecticut, they're all looking at the largest public libraries first. Texas is doing it, the state of Texas is doing it differently. They're focusing in on the smallest of the public libraries because they feel that's where the biggest need is. So that has been a wonderful project that will continue through next year. This app is under active development. I am constantly putting in new releases, new feature requests, bug requests, constantly creating more development. If a library really wanted to be involved in something, on an open source side just to see what it's like, this would be a great project for somebody to come in and just get a sense for how these things work. Consortial functionality is already in, so if you're in an Overdrive consortium or a Baker and Taylor consortium, plus you have your own, not a problem. On the right-hand side, I do mention two things that are coming at the end of summer, and with these two pieces, this piece of software should be ready for just about any library, and that is the audiobooks from Overdrive and the Android. We have been having so many issues with the Android app that I tell libraries right now, probably just stick with patrons right now that use iOS or Apple. Android has, sometime when I'm with you, take me aside, I'll tell you all the issues we've been having with it. I will just say that Android is more difficult to work with, but we expect to see that all fixed with the new reader I mentioned by the end of summer. So as soon as those things are done, we're going to be over a huge hump with this open source project. The web-based SimplyE will be available by the end of summer as well. And then, of course, I've mentioned the DPLA exchange as a way for another option for libraries to be able to purchase ebooks and audiobooks, not moving through a commercial vendor, but through a nonprofit. So this is where everybody is. And if you can look, you can see that there is a consortium in California that is doing wonderful work. There is a consortium in Minnesota that is doing a little bit in Illinois as well. There's a bunch of libraries coming in through Lyrasis. Georgia, the State Library of Georgia, pretty soon here, in the next 6 months, we're going to see Georgia with lots of dots in it. And then the center, all the way up through Nebraska, all the way over to Phoenix, this is us. This is Arizona. This is us. And I do want to mention right here that Enid Public Library came on just in the last month. So that's our first Oklahoma library, and we are very excited about that. So just another, this is just us. These are the libraries that Amigos is hosting. So where are we headed? Obviously, Overdrive audiobooks. Obviously, the Android fixes are coming. The updated reader is coming as well at the end of summer. PDFs that require DRM. If you look down the bottom of this page where it says more content providers, and you see EBSCO and ProQuest there, yes, we are working with EBSCO and ProQuest. The issue with EBSCO and ProQuest is that most of their titles are in PDF, and they are DRM'd. As opposed to Overdrive and Baker and Taylor, most of their titles are in EPUB, which is a standard format. But PDF, so we really have to get the DRM piece of PDF out. So that's why this, as soon as we get over this hump in the summer, PDF DRM is going to come up really quickly. Academic functionality is coming. Documentation, it's an open source project. The last thing that's going to be done is documentation, guaranteed. But that's being done now. That's part of a grant that we have. By the end of August, there will be a set of promotional materials for patrons, as well as some basic, here's 1, 2, 3, how to use SimplyE. We are also working on a grant where a library can upload their own locally created materials. So EPUB or PDF, if you have local creatives and they want to upload their ebook and have it show alongside the titles that you've purchased from Overdrive, or if you want to go directly to a publisher and you want to get a niche collection, all of that becomes available. Under content provider, I do want to mention Hoopla, because people always ask me about Hoopla. Hoopla is different. And every time I say that, people say, yeah, we know, it's very different. Hoopla works with 27 different types of DRM. 27, which means that SimplyE has to deal with 27 types of DRM. Hoopla also is a streaming service. One of the decisions that was made early on in this project, that may change, but is made early on, for accessibility reasons, we wanted download only. That way, when a patron is not around Wi-Fi, they still have access to their ebooks and their audiobooks. Hoopla is streaming. So I say that just to tell you that we are talking to Hoopla. Hoopla is talking to us. It's going to be a couple years. This is not anything that is going to happen very soon. EBSCO and ProQuest will probably come in before that. And we are looking at EBSCO and ProQuest and Gale, because a lot of state libraries provide those across the state. So those are major content providers. As I mentioned, you can go try this yourself. Go to your app store, look for SimplyE. You'll see this icon and just download it and play with that open collection, that freely available collection. And this is what it looks like. So what's going on at Amigos? Just a couple slides of taking this down from the national down to what's going on geographically, and then down to what Amigos is doing. As I said, this became a real Amigos service in the fall. There is an annual fee. We get charged every time somebody searches, every time somebody downloads, every time somebody returns a book, whether you return it early or it returns. Every time that there is any kind of transaction, there is a charge. Plus there's a charge for hosting the metadata and the cover art. So those are the charges we're trying to recoup when we set an annual fee. It's not high, but it is based on how much a library spends in electronic materials right now. And then whether you're a member. This is one of those services that is available to anybody. It doesn't matter if you're an Amigos member or not. You'll pay a little bit more, but you're welcome to come to this. And we're happy to bring you on. So the idea being for the electronic expenditures, that gives us an idea of transactions. Because if a very small public library comes to us and they have no eBooks, then their transaction level is going to be very low. And so they're going to get the least. But if a very large library came in, in Texas, we would think Houston or Harris County, some of the largest libraries, they spend a lot in electronic expenditures. Their patrons are very used to using electronic materials. Those transactions are going to be very high, therefore they should pay more. It is not based on population served. This is based on how much you pay right now, which we think is a fairer way to price this. If you're interested, by the way, in what it would cost for you, let me know, and I can get you that. I do want to mention this because this is how Enid came in. We are doing a three-month free trial for SimplyE, and if anybody is interested in this, up until we're probably going to finish this trial sometime in July, mid-August. And then we'll move into something a little bit different. But for right now, if you want to try SimplyE yourself, it doesn't cost you anything. We'll set you up and you get 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, you can say, nope, and then no harm done, you haven't paid us anything. Or you can say, yeah, we really think we want to move forward with this, and then that's when the subscription would start. So Enid came in under this, under our 90-day trial. And more information about the form and how you can get more information about it. There is a page on the website with information about SimplyE, but what I want to draw your attention to is this last tab for webinars. I do a webinar every month on SimplyE, and I just set up the whole next set for the next fiscal year. You just have to register. We record it. If you're interested in what it is and how it works, just attend one of these. I do live demos in those so that you can also see it. I also, excuse me, gosh, I was going to say something else about the webinars, and now it's just, I was looking at the dates and it just went out of my head. Anyway, if you're interested, come to one of the webinars. Oh, that's it. I do have an email list that I keep for people who are interested in following the project. So you might be interested, but your library's not interested. There are things you have to do first, or you want to see more development on the app, or you're just interested in open source. I send out a message maybe once every 2 months. And if you're interested in being on that list, just email us at simplye@amigos.org and just tell us you want to be on the list, and I'll just add you. There's nothing else you need to do, and the email address is up here on the slide. So is it an app, one app to rule them all? Well, we're hoping so. It's not there yet, but it definitely is a vision and it's a goal. And we are definitely working towards it. We've already had people ask us for magazines and video. It's in the list, but it's not yet, but it's coming. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Allison and see, Allison, if you have any questions for me.
Okay, well, first off, I want to thank you so much, Christine, for this presentation. I thought it was so great, and it is, now's the time to get in on the ground floor, and, people could really have some input on things, that they would like to see in the future. So you answered a couple of my questions as going along when you mentioned about, the Adobe ID. It just took me back to the days of Adobe Digital Editions, and oh my gosh, what a nightmare that was.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you about Kindle books. So you kind of answered that. And then you kind of hit on the consortium. And I know many of us in Oklahoma, we are part of the OK Virtual Library, and Enid might be too, that is the consortium through Overdrive. So how does that work if you are part of a consortium and you're interested in joining? Like, is it any different? Does it work the same? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. If you are part of specifically an Overdrive consortium, any consortium works the same, but Overdrive is usually the biggest one. What we would do is we would contact Overdrive and get the API credentials. And I'm not going to talk a little bit. API is just a way that we can connect to Overdrive so that they know what titles are in and out and give us access to your collection. And we ingest the metadata and we ingest the cover art on our servers. So if it's a consortial collection, we only have to ingest that once. And so if Enid is part of that, then we already have that collection. If Enid also has an Advantage collection, and I'm sorry, I should have checked and I don't know for sure, but if they have an Advantage collection, we would ingest that as well. And to a patron, it doesn't make any difference. It's all the Enid Public Library collection. But on the back end, they are two separate collections. And so Enid can continue to do collection development on their own collection, as well as the consortium continuing to develop their own on the consortial side. If you do have the same title across both, and sometimes we have libraries that have a Baker and Taylor collection and they have an Overdrive collection, and we see this there as well. If there's the same title across both, you will see it listed twice. So I just want to draw that how to deal with that hasn't been dealt with yet. I mean, as librarians, we know what we want to see. It just hasn't been dealt with to put it in programming. So you will see multiples if that title comes from multiple providers.
Awesome. Okay. Well,
Does that help?
yes, it does. And I kind of wish our IT guy was in here because I know that he would have so many, but for all of you people watching are going, I have so many questions. You're not asking the right ones. Please email Christine if you have any questions. I am not a technology person, so I'm just thinking of from my perspective. Another question I had is I noticed, you have all the different categories, like within fiction or nonfiction. Are those categories that come in from a library's ILS? Are those in the setup process that each library would input based on their patron needs?
So this is interesting, and it is different than what you will. I can almost guarantee it's different than what you think it is. The categories that are used right now are called BISAC categories. B as in boy, I, S as in Sam, AC. These are the categories that you will see in a bookstore. So if you think, and those of you who are librarians, you're probably shaking your head saying, oh yeah, okay, now I know what those are. So the lanes that as they're configured right now are based on those categories. There is a crosswalk. Well, I should say that the titles that come in from the vendors come in with BISAC categories. It is only when they come into a library that they convert those to LCSH or to some other subject heading scheme. So for the moment, what you're seeing are those BISAC categories, which can be modified and they can be changed. But with the advent of academic, there's already talk about moving into real subject headings. So I think that we can see over the next year and a half, two on the outside. I would think within the next year and a half, we're going to start seeing subject headings come in as an option for libraries.
Okay, and then you mentioned that like the purchasing will stay with the vendors. So as we go in and purchase our new items from Overdrive or Baker and Taylor, are they automatically uploaded to SimplyE? Is there like a 24-hour turnaround, or how does that?
Yeah, I Depending on when you buy it, because the script runs once a day, but
Okay.
I would say if you give yourself 24 hours, they will definitely be there.
Okay.
But it runs once a day, and it could be 6 hours, 4 hours, depending on when you purchase it. But yes, within the
Okay.
next day.
Okay. Awesome. Well, those are the only questions I have. Before we finish, do you have any final thoughts, anything you would like to share with everyone?
I would just say that one thing that we didn't know was coming, obviously, was the pandemic. And I mentioned that Texas, we have been working since last July to bring in a lot of small libraries into SimplyE, and many of those libraries never had eBooks before. The Texas State Library is providing a collection of eBooks in addition to SimplyE. So what we have seen in those smaller libraries is they have patrons they did not know existed before because they didn't have the electronic materials, or they didn't have um, um, the confidence maybe to put them out themselves. And what we're seeing is that this app has really helped many libraries, especially through the first couple of months when everybody was locked down. And if we go through another lockdown like that, that's where this type of app really comes to the fore, and the timing on it was wonderful. I understand that it may not be quite ready for some libraries, and I've had libraries tell me no, and that's fine. But I think there's a lot of libraries out there it could help, and that's really where it comes in for us.
Yeah, I think that everything that Texas is doing, that is just wonderful. And I work for the Southern Oklahoma Library System, and many of our libraries, 7 out of our 8, are in rural communities. And
Mhm.
so to see these independent rural libraries who don't necessarily have those resources, I think that is just so awesome that they are doing something like that.
It is.
So. Okay, well, I would like to thank you all for joining us. And Christine, once again, thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this session, I would really like to encourage you to view some other PLD sessions. And I would also like to encourage you to join the Public Library Division. We do meetings once a month. We discuss different things such as this. It's a different topic every month, but it all pertains to public libraries. So I hope to see you at some other sessions. And finally, don't forget to fill out a conference evaluation. So everyone have a great day.